The desert wind carried the acrid smell of gunpowder across the forward operating base in Afghanistan when Navy SEAL Commander Marcus "Sledgehammer" Rodriguez made a decision that would shock every operator under his command. He walked across the compound's central courtyard, past the armory, past the Tactical Operations Center, and stopped directly in front of the maintenance shed where 29-year-old Elena Vasquez was methodically cleaning rifle components with the same precision she applied to mopping floors. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Without a word, Rodriguez extended his custom Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifle toward the woman everyone knew simply as the cleaning lady. The weapon, worth more than most people's annual salaries, gleamed in the harsh Afghan sun as Elena's calloused hands closed around its stock. What happened next would rewrite everything the special operations community thought they knew about hidden talent, and force them to question every assumption they'd made about the quiet woman who emptied their trash cans and sanitized their equipment. Elena Vasquez had been invisible for so long that most personnel at Forward Operating Base Thunderbolt couldn't even remember when she'd first arrived. Her small frame moved through the compound like a ghost, appearing at 0500 hours each morning with her cart of cleaning supplies and disappearing into the maze of buildings that housed some of America's most elite warriors, at 5 inches with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun and hands permanently stained by industrial cleaners. She embodied everything the military expected from civilian support staff: efficient, unobtrusive, and completely forgettable. The base operated on a carefully orchestrated schedule that Elena had memorized down to the minute. She knew that the armory opened at 0530, that weapons maintenance began at 0600, and that tactical briefing started at 700. Her cleaning route was precisely timed to avoid interfering with operational activities, while ensuring that every space met the exacting standards required in a combat zone. The ammunition storage facility needed daily inventory cleaning. The communication center required specialized anti-static procedures, and the medical bay demanded hospital-grade sanitization protocols. What the operators didn't know was that Elena's background had prepared her for much more than custodial work. Born in El Paso, Texas, to a family with deep military roots, she'd grown up surrounded by weapons, tactics, and a kind of technical knowledge that most people associated exclusively with combat personnel. Her father, Sergeant Major Carlos Vasquez, had served 3 tours in Iraq as an explosives disposal specialist before retiring to work as a civilian contractor. Her brother Miguel had been a Marine Corps scout sniper before an IED explosion ended his career and his life during her sophomore year of college. The loss of Miguel had derailed Elena's original plans to join the military as an intelligence officer. Instead, she'd thrown herself into mechanical engineering studies, graduating with honors before taking a series of civilian contractor positions that kept her close to military environments without requiring her to carry a weapon. Her technical expertise in weapon systems had developed through necessity rather than formal training, acquired during long conversations with her father about ordnance disposal and countless hours studying Miguel's tactical manuals after his death. Working at Forward Thunderbolt represented both penance and proximity for Elena. She couldn't save her brother, but she could ensure that other operators had the cleanest, most reliable equipment possible. Her cleaning protocols went far beyond regulatory requirements, incorporating techniques she'd learned from her father about preventing corrosion in harsh environments and maintaining precision instruments under extreme conditions. When she cleaned rifle scopes, she understood the optical principles that made them function. When she sanitized communications equipment, she grasped the electronic systems that enabled tactical coordination. The operators treated her with the casual courtesy reserved for essential but unremarkable support personnel. They appreciated her work, relied on her consistency, and never questioned her presence in sensitive areas because she'd proven herself trustworthy through months of competent service. Staff Sergeant Tommy Chun, the unit's senior communications specialist, had developed a habit of leaving technical manuals open on his desk when Elena cleaned his office, unconsciously providing her access to information that fed her hunger for understanding complex systems. Master Chief Petty Officer Sarah Bulldog Morrison, the unit's explosive ordnance disposal expert, had noticed Elena's unusual attention to detail when cleaning bomb disposal equipment. Most custodial staff treated such devices with nervous respect, clinging around them rather than properly maintaining the precision instruments that separated successful missions from catastrophic failures. Elena approached each piece of equipment with the kind of systematic thoroughness that suggested deeper understanding than her job description implied. Commander Rodriguez himself had observed Elena's work habits during his late-night walks through the compound. Her dedication to perfection puzzled him because it exceeded what anyone expected from civilian support staff. She would spend 30 minutes ensuring that a single rifle scope was absolutely spotless, when 5 minutes would have satisfied contract requirements. Her equipment cart contained cleaning supplies that most janitors wouldn't recognize, specialized solvents and precision tools that suggested someone who understood the technical demands of maintaining complex weapon systems. The base's armory became Elena's unofficial classroom during off-duty hours. Sergeant First Class David Reaper Williams, the unit's primary armorer, had grown accustomed to finding Elena there during evening hours, meticulously cleaning weapons that didn't require attention. He'd initially been suspicious of her presence, but her work was so thorough and professional that he'd begun leaving increasingly complex weapons for her to maintain. What started as basic rifle cleaning had evolved into complete maintenance of precision instruments that required technical knowledge far beyond custodial training. Elena's living quarters told the story of someone whose interests extended far beyond janitorial duties. Hidden among regulation personal items were technical manuals she'd acquired through careful networking with base personnel, ballistics charts that explained projectile behavior under various conditions and maintenance, guides for weapon systems she encountered during her cleaning duties. She studied these materials with the same intensity she'd once applied to engineering coursework, memorizing specifications and procedures that most support personnel would never need to understand. Her daily routine included physical conditioning that exceeded what anyone expected from civilian contractors. While most support staff focused on meeting basic fitness requirements, Elena maintained the kind of physical conditioning that would allow her to function effectively in demanding situations. Her morning runs began before dawn and extended well beyond the base perimeter, building endurance and familiarity with terrain that most non-combat personnel never explored. The psychological discipline Elena had developed through grief and academic challenge served her well in the military environment. She'd learned to compartmentalize emotion, focusing on technical problems that provided relief from personal pain, while building capabilities that honored her brother's memory. Her engineering background had taught her to approach complex systems methodically, breaking down problems into manageable components that could be understood and solved through systematic analysis. Language skills provided another hidden advantage that Elena had never revealed to base personnel. Her fluency in Pashto and Dari, acquired during college study and enhanced through interaction with Afghan civilians, could have been valuable for intelligence gathering and local population engagement. But civilian contractors weren't expected to possess such capabilities, and Elena had learned that exceeding expectations often created complications rather than opportunities. The base's shooting range became her sanctuary during off-duty hours, when operational personnel were engaged in other activities. Range Sergeant Maria Santos had noticed Elena's precision during basic qualification requirements, and gradually allowed her access to various weapon systems for familiarization training. What had started as meeting minimum contractor requirements had evolved into something approaching expertise. Though Elena was careful to maintain the appearance of basic competency rather than revealing the depth of her capabilities as Elena completed another routine day of cleaning and maintenance. She had no way of knowing that her months of quiet preparation and skill development were about to be tested in ways that would force everyone around her to reconsider their assumptions about capability, dedication, and the hidden potential that existed within their invisible support structure. The rigid structure of forward operating base Thunderbolt operated on an intricate web of clearance levels, specializations, and unspoken boundaries that determined who belonged where and when. Elena had learned to navigate this invisible maze through careful observation and painful experience, understanding that her civilian contractor status placed her in a category that was simultaneously essential and excluded from the real work of the base. Security clearances created the most obvious barriers to Elena's deeper involvement in base operations. While she possessed the basic clearance necessary to clean sensitive areas, accessing technical information required higher authorization levels that civilian contractors rarely received. When she encountered classified documents during her cleaning duties, protocol demanded that she avert her eyes and report their presence to appropriate personnel. The irony wasn't lost on her that she often understood the technical content better than some of the personnel authorized to read it. The morning briefing room exemplified these institutional boundaries. Elena cleaned the space before each tactical session, ensuring that electronic equipment functioned properly and that presentation materials were clearly visible. She'd memorized the layout of every switch, cable, and display screen in the room through months of maintenance work. Yet when briefings began, she was expected to vanish, her technical knowledge deemed irrelevant to discussions about operations she helped enable through her behind-the-scenes work. Commander Rodriguez embodied the complexity of military hierarchy. When it came to civilian contractors, he appreciated Elena's work quality and had specifically requested her assignment to maintain his personal equipment, recognizing that her attention to detail exceeded standard contractor performance. However, his appreciation was limited to her assigned role. During planning sessions where tactical teams struggled with equipment malfunctions that Elena could diagnose immediately, her presence was neither requested nor considered relevant. Base's intelligence section presented another example of institutional limitations that frustrated Elena's desire to contribute more meaningfully. Her language skills could have provided valuable assistance with document translation and local communication intercepts, but intelligence analysis was restricted to personnel with appropriate specializations and security clearances. She'd occasionally overhear analysts struggling with Pashto translations that she could have completed accurately in minutes, but offering assistance would have been seen as overstepping boundaries rather than helpful initiative. Master Chief Morrison had developed a particular blindness to Elena's capabilities that reflected broader institutional thinking about civilian contractors. During explosive ordnance disposal briefings, Morrison would discuss technical problems that Elena recognized from her father's expertise in the field. Her understanding of electronic timing systems, pressure-sensitive triggers, and chemical explosive properties could have informed tactical decisions about bomb disposal operations. Instead, she remained invisible during these discussions, her knowledge dismissed as irrelevant because it existed outside official training programs. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The base's communication center provided daily examples of how Elena's technical understanding was overlooked by personnel who couldn't imagine that a janitor might comprehend complex electronic systems. When radio equipment malfunctioned, technicians would spend hours troubleshooting problems that Elena had already identified during her cleaning routine. Her engineering background had taught her to recognize component failures and signal interference patterns, but suggesting solutions would have been seen as presumptuous rather than helpful. Physical training requirements created another barrier that reflected assumptions about civilian contractor capabilities. While Elena maintained fitness levels that exceeded those of many combat personnel, she wasn't permitted to participate in unit training exercises that might have demonstrated her conditioning and tactical awareness. Her morning runs were solitary affairs that kept her isolated from the team-building activities that created bonds between military personnel. Equipment allocation reflected these same limitations in concrete ways that affected Elena's ability to demonstrate her capabilities. While she maintained weapon systems daily, she wasn't authorized to carry personal protection beyond basic equipment required for civilian contractors. Her requests for enhanced communications gear that would allow her to coordinate more effectively with security personnel were consistently denied, not because of cost considerations, but because such equipment was deemed inappropriate for support staff. The base's training facilities embodied these restrictions in physical form. Elena had access to basic fitness equipment during off-duty hours, but advanced tactical training areas were reserved for military personnel only. Her shooting practice was limited to basic qualification requirements, preventing her from demonstrating the precision shooting skills she developed through personal study and practice. The irony was that she often cleaned these advanced training areas, understanding their purpose and configuration better than some authorized users. Social dynamics reinforced professional limitations through subtle but persistent exclusion from informal networks where real information flowed. When combat personnel gathered to discuss technical challenges or share tactical insights, Elena's presence would unconsciously alter conversation topics toward subjects deemed appropriate for civilian ears. She became accustomed to watch invaluable discussions shift to mundane topics whenever she entered a room, limiting her access to the kind of professional development that occurred naturally among military personnel. The base's medical facility presented unique challenges that highlighted Elena's excluded status. While she maintained medical equipment with the same precision she applied to weapon systems, her input wasn't sought when personnel discussed equipment limitations or performance issues. Her engineering background had taught her to understand the technical specifications of diagnostic equipment and life support systems, but medical personnel assumed her knowledge was limited to basic cleaning procedures. Supply chain management created another area where Elena's insights were consistently overlooked, despite her intimate knowledge of equipment performance and failure patterns. Through her maintenance work, she developed an understanding of which components required frequent replacement and which systems were prone to specific failures under combat conditions. This knowledge could have informed procurement decisions and maintenance scheduling, but purchasing decisions were made without input from personnel who actually serviced the equipment daily. The base's armory represented the most frustrating example of Elena's excluded status. While she spent more time with weapon systems than many authorized users, her observations about performance issues and maintenance requirements weren't considered relevant to tactical planning. She'd noticed patterns in equipment failures that could inform weapon selection for specific missions, but sharing such insights would have been seen as exceeding her responsibilities rather than providing valuable intelligence. Elena's living arrangements reflected her outsider status in physical terms that reinforced social boundaries. While military personnel were housed in sections that facilitated informal interaction and professional development, civilian contractors were segregated in separate facilities that limited their integration with operational units. This physical separation created social barriers that made it difficult to build the relationships necessary for expanded opportunities. Documentation requirements created bureaucratic barriers that prevented Elena from pursuing additional training or expanded responsibilities. Civilian contractors operated under different regulatory frameworks than military personnel, making it nearly impossible to access advanced training programs or certification courses that might have formalized her existing knowledge. Her requests for technical training were consistently denied, not because of capability questions but because institutional procedures didn't accommodate civilian contractor development in tactical areas. The base's rapid response protocols illustrated how institutional thinking limited Elena's potential contributions during emergency situations. While she understood base layout and equipment locations better than many military personnel, emergency procedures didn't include provisions for utilizing civilian contractor knowledge during crisis situations. She was expected to evacuate and remain clear of operational areas, regardless of how her technical expertise might assist response efforts. As Elena completed another day of being simultaneously essential and invisible, she reflected on the gap between institutional perception and individual capability. The military's emphasis on specialization and clearance levels created efficiency in normal operations, but also created blind spots that prevented recognition of unconventional resources that might prove valuable during exceptional circumstances. While the base slept, Elena Vasquez transformed her modest contractor quarters into a clandestine academy that would have impressed even the most dedicated military scholars. The fluorescent light above her regulation desk cast harsh shadows across technical manuals, ballistics charts, and tactical diagrams that she'd carefully acquired through months of patient networking and strategic conversations with base personnel, who never suspected the depth of her hunger for knowledge. Her collection had grown methodically, each acquisition representing a calculated risk and careful cultivation of relationships with personnel who possessed access to information beyond her clearance level. Sergeant Santos from the firing range had unknowingly provided her with advanced marksmanship manuals by leaving them in areas Elena cleaned, never realizing that her casual questions about weapon maintenance stemmed from genuine technical curiosity rather than small talk. Master Chief Morrison's habit of leaving ordnance disposal guides open during breaks had given Elena access to explosive theory that built upon her father's teachings about bomb disposal techniques. The laptop computer, hidden beneath her regulation linens, contained files that would have shocked her supervisors with their scope and sophistication. Elena had taught herself to access unclassified technical databases through the base's education network, ostensibly for general self-improvement, but actually to study subjects that directly related to combat operations. Her engineering background provided the foundation for understanding complex systems, but her self-directed education had expanded into areas that most civilian contractors never encountered. Ballistics became her primary obsession during evening study sessions that stretched well past regulation lights out. The science of projectile motion had fascinated her since childhood conversations with her brother, Miguel, about the mathematics of precision shooting. Now she studied trajectory calculations, wind compensation factors, and environmental effects on bullet flight with the intensity of someone preparing for doctoral examinations. Her notebook contained hand-drawn charts that correlated atmospheric conditions with point-of-impact adjustments for various weapon systems. The Barrett .50 caliber rifle represented the pinnacle of her theoretical knowledge, a weapon system she'd studied with obsessive attention to every technical specification and operational parameter. Through careful observation during her cleaning duties, she'd memorized the locations of every Barrett on the base, understood their individual zero settings, and could recite their maintenance histories from memory. Her theoretical understanding of the weapon's capabilities exceeded that of some authorized operators who relied on basic training rather than comprehensive study. Elena's study of enemy tactics had evolved through analysis of after-action reports that she encountered during her cleaning duties in the intelligence section. While she couldn't access classified operational details, She could observe patterns in equipment damage and personnel reports that suggested enemy capabilities and preferred attack methods. Her engineering mindset allowed her to reverse engineer tactical situations from physical evidence, building understanding of asymmetric warfare that informed her theoretical preparations. Communication protocols had become another area of intensive study as Elena recognized that technical capabilities meant nothing without the ability to coordinate effectively with combat units. Through her maintenance work in the communication center, she'd memorized radio frequencies, call signs, and emergency procedures that would allow her to integrate with military operations if circumstances ever demanded such coordination. Her language skills provided additional advantages that she kept carefully hidden, understanding that revealing such capabilities might create complications rather than opportunities. Physical conditioning had evolved beyond basic fitness requirements into specialized training that prepared her body for demands that most civilian contractors would never face. Her engineering background had taught her to approach physical development systematically, analyzing the biomechanics of combat movements and designing exercise routines that would enhance performance under stress. She practiced shooting positions in her quarters, developing muscle memory for stable firing platforms without access to actual weapons. The psychological aspects of combat performance had become Elena's most sophisticated area of study, drawing upon sports psychology texts and military leadership manuals to understand how stress affected decision-making and performance under pressure. She practiced visualization techniques that allowed her to mentally rehearse complex scenarios, building confidence and familiarity with tactical situations she'd never actually experienced. Her brother's letters from Iraq had provided insights into combat psychology that academic texts couldn't convey. Elena's study of base security procedures had resulted from her unique access to multiple facilities during her cleaning duties. She understood patrol patterns, sensor locations, and vulnerability assessments better than most security personnel, because her work required movement through restricted areas at various times. This knowledge could have been valuable for force protection planning, but sharing such observations would have raised questions about why a janitor was analyzing security measures rather than simply performing custodial duties. The base's equipment inventory had become Elena's personal database through months of maintenance work that exposed her to weapons systems, electronic devices, and specialized gear that most personnel encountered only during specific training or operations. She knew which units possessed particular capabilities, understood equipment compatibility issues, and could predict maintenance requirements based on usage patterns. Her engineering background allowed her to troubleshoot problems that stumped users who relied on basic operational training rather than technical understanding. Medical knowledge had expanded beyond basic first aid requirements as Elena recognized that combat situations demanded understanding of trauma treatment under field conditions. Her study of battlefield medicine was informed by her engineering approach to problem solving, analyzing human physiology as a system that could be maintained and repaired using appropriate techniques and equipment. Her brother's experience with combat injuries had provided motivation for understanding how to treat wounds that academic medical training might not adequately address. The most dangerous aspect of Elena's secret education was her growing confidence that she could perform effectively in roles far beyond her assigned responsibilities. Months of intensive study had built theoretical knowledge that approached professional competence in areas where she'd never received formal training. Her engineering background provided analytical skills that allowed her to synthesize information from multiple sources, building comprehensive understanding that exceeded what single-source training typically provided. Elena's personal communication equipment had been carefully selected to provide capabilities that exceeded standard contractor requirements without attracting official attention. Her radio could monitor military frequencies during training exercises, allowing her to study tactical communication patterns, and understand how combat units coordinated complex operations. Her personal GPS device contained waypoints for terrain features and facility locations that she'd mapped during her extended conditioning runs around the base perimeter. The most challenging aspect of maintaining her secret education was the psychological isolation it created. Elena couldn't discuss her interests with colleagues who wouldn't understand why a janitor needed to know about ballistics or tactical communications. Her dedication to continuous learning had become a solitary pursuit that separated her from both civilian contractors, who were satisfied with their assigned roles, and military personnel, who couldn't imagine that support staff might possess relevant knowledge. As Elena completed another evening of intensive study, she reflected on the growing gap between her theoretical capabilities and practical opportunities to apply them. Her months of preparation had built confidence that she could contribute meaningfully to military operations, but institutional barriers prevented her from demonstrating such capabilities. The question that haunted her late-night study sessions was whether her preparation would ever prove useful, or whether she was simply pursuing knowledge for its own sake in a system that would never recognize unconventional competence. Her hidden arsenal of knowledge had grown beyond what anyone could have imagined, transforming a janitor into someone who understood combat operations at levels that approached professional competence. Whether that transformation would ever be recognized or utilized remained an open question that only extraordinary circumstances could answer. The first crack in Elena's carefully constructed facade appeared on a humid Tuesday morning when Staff Sergeant Danny "Viper" Johnson made an observation that would set in motion a series of events destined to either vindicate or destroy everything she'd worked to build. Standing in the armory while conducting routine inventory, Johnson paused mid-count and turned to his partner, Corporal Lisa "Thunder" Martinez, with a puzzled expression that carried the weight of sudden realization. "Have you ever noticed how the cleaning lady knows exactly which tools to use for each weapon system?" Johnson's voice carried the casual tone of someone making conversation, but his words landed like artillery shells in the quiet space between rifle racks. Martinez looked up from her clipboard, following Johnson's gaze toward the maintenance area where Elena was methodically disassembling a communications device with movements that spoke of intimate familiarity rather than basic training. "Now that you mention it," Martinez replied slowly, her own observation skills engaging as she watched Elena select specialized tools without hesitation. "She handles that equipment like someone who actually understands what she's doing. Most contractors treat that stuff like it might explode if they touch it wrong." The two soldiers continued their inventory in silence, but the seed of suspicion had been planted in soil that was already fertile with questions about the quiet woman who seemed to know more than her job description suggested. Word spread through the base with the peculiar velocity that characterized military gossip, each retelling adding new details and interpretations that transformed innocent observations into potential security concerns. By afternoon chow, half the base had heard some version of the story about the janitor who demonstrated unusual technical competence. By evening formation, Elena's name was being mentioned in conversations that carried undertones of suspicion rather than appreciation. Master Chief Morrison found herself reluctantly drawn into the developing controversy when multiple personnel approached her with observations about Elena's behavior during equipment maintenance. "Chief, I'm probably overthinking this," began Petty Officer Second Class Robert Shark Williams, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone raising sensitive issues. "But that contractor woman asks awfully specific questions about ordnance disposal procedures. Like really specific. Technical stuff that most people wouldn't even think to ask about." Morrison's initial reaction was defensive, recognizing Elena's exceptional work quality and professional demeanor. "Williams, the woman's been cleaning our equipment for 8 months. She's bound to pick up some technical knowledge just from observation and conversation." But even as she spoke, Morrison found herself remembering incidents that took on new significance when viewed through the lens of suspicion that was beginning to cloud judgments. Throughout the base, the transformation in how Elena's behavior was interpreted proved devastating in ways that she couldn't directly combat. Her habit of arriving early to prepare work areas was reframed as suspicious surveillance of operational activities. Her attention to detail during equipment maintenance became evidence of inappropriate interest in military capabilities. Even her physical fitness routine was viewed through the new paradigm of suspicion, with personnel wondering why a janitor needed to maintain conditioning that exceeded what most combat personnel achieved. Sergeant First Class Michael Razor Thompson, the unit's senior intelligence analyst, found himself fielding questions about Elena's security clearance and background investigation that reflected growing concerns about her access to sensitive areas. "Look, her clearance is solid," Thompson explained to a group of increasingly skeptical operators. "But maybe we should consider whether civilian contractors need access to quite so much sensitive equipment and information." The suggestion carried implications that everyone understood, but nobody wanted to state directly. Elena's relationship with Sergeant Santos at the firing range became a particular source of speculation as personnel began questioning why a janitor spent so much time at a facility that wasn't part of her assigned cleaning route. Santos found herself defending conversations that had seemed innocent when they occurred, but now appeared potentially problematic when subjected to security-conscious scrutiny. "She's just interested in learning," Santos insisted, but her words carried less conviction as doubt crept into her assessment of Elena's motivations. The base's communication center became another focal point for suspicion as personnel began noting Elena's presence during sensitive periods when classified information was being processed. Communications Specialist First Class Angela Wire Davis reported that Elena had been present during several occasions when sensitive traffic was being handled, raising questions about whether civilian contractors should have such unrestricted access to areas where operational security was paramount. Commander Rodriguez found himself caught between competing pressures as reports about Elena's behavior reached his attention through multiple channels. His personal observation of her work quality argued against the growing suspicions, but his responsibility for operational security demanded that he take seriously any concerns raised by his personnel. The situation was particularly delicate because Elena had never violated any explicit regulations or procedures, making it difficult to address concerns that were based primarily on interpretation and inference. The psychological impact on Elena was profound as she watched months of carefully built relationships deteriorate under the weight of suspicion that she couldn't directly address. Any attempt to explain her interests or defend her behavior would only reinforce the narrative that she was inappropriately focused on matters beyond her responsibilities. She found herself trapped in a situation where her dedication to excellence was being reinterpreted as evidence of questionable motives. Her access to various base facilities began to be quietly restricted as personnel implemented informal limitations that didn't require official justification. The armory visits that had provided opportunities for technical learning were discouraged through scheduling changes that limited her presence during weapon maintenance periods. Her cleaning assignments were modified to reduce her exposure to sensitive equipment and classified materials, effectively limiting her ability to continue the informal education that had been building her capabilities. The social dynamics at Forward Operating Base Thunderbolt shifted dramatically as Elena found herself increasingly isolated from the informal networks that had provided both information and professional relationships. Conversations would pause when she entered rooms, resume with different topics when she was present, and carry an undercurrent of caution that hadn't existed before. The transformation from acceptance to suspicion was particularly painful because it occurred without any specific accusations that she could address or refute. Elena's living situation became more uncomfortable as other civilian contractors began to distance themselves from someone who had attracted unwelcome attention from military personnel. The contractor community operated on principles of invisibility and compliance, making Elena's perceived deviation from appropriate behavior a source of anxiety for colleagues who feared guilt by association. Her isolation extended beyond professional relationships to encompass her entire social environment on the base. The most damaging aspect of the Whisper campaign was how it recontextualized Elena's entire service record and personal history. Her excellent performance evaluations were now viewed through the lens of someone who might be overly ambitious or inappropriately interested in matters beyond her assigned responsibilities. Her technical questions that had once been appreciated as professional curiosity were now interpreted as evidence concerning motivations that required monitoring and limitation. Security protocols that had never seemed relevant to Elena's work began to be applied with new stringency as base leadership sought to address concerns without making specific accusations. Her movements were tracked more carefully, her access to sensitive areas was monitored more closely, and her interactions with military personnel were subject to scrutiny that made normal professional relationships increasingly difficult to maintain. Base's training facilities became another source of tension as Elena's presence during off-duty hours was noted and questioned by personnel, who wondered why a civilian contractor needed to maintain such high levels of physical conditioning. Her shooting practice, which had been tolerated as meeting basic qualification requirements, was now viewed as potentially inappropriate interest in combat capabilities that exceeded her professional needs. Elena's request for additional technical training, which she had submitted months earlier, was now reviewed with suspicion rather than consideration for professional development. The timing of the request, when viewed in conjunction with observations about her behavior, seemed to support concerns about her inappropriate ambitions rather than evidence of dedication to continuous improvement. The Whisper campaign reached a crescendo when multiple personnel formally requested that Elena's access and responsibilities be reviewed by base security. The requests weren't based on any specific violations or security breaches, but rather on the cumulative weight of observations and interpretations that suggested she might pose some undefined risk to operational security. The vague nature of the concerns made them particularly difficult to address through normal procedures, creating a situation where suspicion could flourish without requiring concrete evidence. As Elena faced the prospect of formal investigation and potential reassignment to duties that would eliminate her access to the technical environment she'd come to value, she realized that her careful preparation and skill development had become liabilities rather than assets. The system that she'd hoped to serve more effectively was now viewing her capabilities as threats rather than resources, forcing her to choose between acceptance of limitations and continued pursuit of excellence that was no longer welcome. Cruel irony of her situation wasn't lost on Elena as she contemplated the possibility that her months of preparation might be wasted because institutional thinking couldn't accommodate the possibility that exceptional competence might exist outside traditional career paths. Her secret arsenal of knowledge had become a burden rather than an asset, threatening to end her military contractor career without ever providing opportunities to demonstrate the capabilities she'd worked so hard to develop. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would force both Elena and the military hierarchy to confront fundamental questions about talent recognition, institutional flexibility, and the price of excellence when it challenges established assumptions about roles and capabilities. The Whisper campaign had created momentum toward a resolution that would either vindicate Elena's unconventional approach to professional development or confirm the institutional wisdom that specialized roles should be maintained through rigid boundaries and traditional career progression. The official summons arrived at 0630 hours on a gray Thursday morning when the Afghan winter wind carried the bite of impending change across forward operating Base Thunderbolt. Elena stared at the formal notification, requiring her immediate presence in Commander Rodriguez's office. Her hands steady despite the adrenaline that flooded her system, as she realized that months of careful preparation and growing suspicion had finally reached their inevitable conclusion. The document's sterile military language couldn't disguise the gravity of what was about to unfold, and Elena understood that her military contractor career hung in the balance of whatever conversation awaited her. Commander Rodriguez's office had been transformed into something resembling a tribunal, with Elena's personnel file spread across his desk like evidence in a court-martial proceeding. The normally informal space now carried an atmosphere of official scrutiny that made clear this wasn't a routine performance review or casual check-in about her duties. Rodriguez himself appeared uncomfortable with the formality, but his expression carried the weight of command decisions that could alter lives and careers with a few carefully chosen words. "Vasquez," Rodriguez began, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had rehearsed this conversation multiple times before delivery. "I need to address some serious concerns that have been raised about your conduct, your interests, and your apparent pursuit of knowledge and capabilities that fall well outside your assigned responsibilities as a civilian contractor." The formal phrasing was carefully chosen to avoid specific accusations while establishing the seriousness of the situation, and Elena felt her stomach tighten as she realized that her worst fears about institutional reaction were being confirmed. Elena's response was equally measured, reflecting months of mental preparation for exactly this type of confrontation. "Sir, I'm not entirely sure what specific concerns you're referring to, but I want to assure you that I've never violated any regulations, procedures, or security protocols during my service at this base." Her words were technically accurate, but carefully avoided acknowledging the deeper issues that had triggered this meeting. Hoping to force Rodriguez to be more specific about the charges against her professional conduct, Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, studying Elena with the intensity of someone trying to measure character against institutional standards and professional expectations. "Multiple personnel have reported that you've been pursuing training, studying technical materials, and demonstrating interest in capabilities that are far beyond what we expect from civilian custodial contractors. There are questions about whether you're fully satisfied with your assigned role and whether your interests might conflict with your professional responsibilities." The accusation hit Elena like a physical blow because it contained enough truth to be difficult to refute while missing the fundamental point about her motivations and dedication to service. She had been pursuing expanded capabilities, did want to contribute more meaningfully to base operations, and wasn't entirely satisfied with the limitations placed on her potential contributions. But Rodriguez's interpretation of her behavior as potentially problematic rather than potentially valuable reflected institutional thinking that couldn't accommodate unconventional excellence. "Sir, my performance evaluations have consistently been excellent," Elena replied, her voice carrying a note of controlled frustration that reflected months of watching her capabilities go unrecognized. "And I've never allowed any personal interests to interfere with my assigned duties. My additional study and training have been conducted during my personal time and have been motivated by a desire to better understand the environment in which I work and the people I support." Rodriguez's expression hardened as he recognized the implicit challenge to his authority and judgment embedded in Elena's response. "Vasquez, the issue isn't your job performance in your assigned role. The issue is scope, focus, and professional boundaries. You've been studying weapon systems, tactical procedures, and operational planning materials that are outside your area of responsibility, expertise, and need to know. This has created questions about your judgment, your understanding of appropriate professional boundaries, and your commitment to the role for which you were hired." Elena felt anger building alongside her fear as she realized that her dedication to excellence was being reframed as evidence of poor judgment and inappropriate ambition. "Sir, I believe that understanding the broader operational context makes me more effective in my support role. Knowledge of the systems I maintain and the operations I support allows me to anticipate needs, prevent problems, and provide better service to the personnel who depend on my work." "That's exactly the problem," Rodriguez replied sharply, his patience clearly wearing thin with what he perceived as Elena's refusal to acknowledge appropriate limitations. "You're not satisfied with supporting operations from within your assigned role. You're studying materials and developing capabilities that suggest you want to participate in operations rather than support them. This raises fundamental questions about your professional maturity and your understanding of military structure and civilian contractor responsibilities." The conversation was deteriorating rapidly toward a conclusion that Elena recognized could end her career without ever providing opportunities to demonstrate the capabilities she'd worked so hard to develop. "Sir, with respect, I'm requesting that you consider the possibility that expanded knowledge and capabilities might enhance, rather than detract from my primary duties. Understanding tactical operations doesn't make me less effective as a support contractor. It makes me more effective because I can anticipate needs and prepare for contingencies that others might not consider." Rodriguez stood up, signaling that the conversation was approaching its conclusion, despite Elena's attempts to reframe the discussion. "Vasquez, I'm going to be very explicit about expectations going forward. You will limit your activities, studies, and interests to areas directly related to your assigned custodial and maintenance responsibilities. You will not pursue tactical training, weapons familiarization beyond basic qualification requirements, or operational planning studies. Your focus will be exclusively on the support role for which you were hired." The ultimatum fell like a gavel, officially constraining Elena's development and growth within institutional boundaries that she'd been unconsciously challenging through her pursuit of excellence. She realized that she was being forced to choose between compliance that would waste her potential and continued development that would risk everything she'd worked to build in her military contractor career. "I need to know that you understand these expectations and that you're committed to operating within them," Rodriguez continued, his voice carrying the finality of command authority. "Any continued behavior that suggests inappropriate ambitions, divided loyalties, or refusal to accept your assigned role will result in immediate termination of your contract and removal from this base. I won't have civilian contractors who can't maintain appropriate professional boundaries." Elena stood as well, her mind racing through implications and options, while maintaining the composed exterior that had served her well throughout months of careful preparation and growing institutional pressure. She could accept these limitations and spend the remainder of her contract as a constrained and underutilized contractor, or she could continue developing her capabilities in secret, knowing that discovery would end her military career permanently. Psychological weight of the decision was enormous because it went beyond simple career calculations to fundamental questions about identity, purpose, and the price of excellence in systems that couldn't accommodate unconventional competence. Elena had spent months building capabilities that could contribute meaningfully to military operations, but those same capabilities were now being treated as threats to institutional order rather than potential assets for mission accomplishment. "I understand your expectations, sir," Elena finally replied, her voice carrying none of the compliance that Rodriguez was hoping to hear, but all of the respect that military protocol demanded. Her words were carefully chosen to acknowledge his authority without committing to limitations that would waste the potential she'd worked so hard to develop. As Elena left Rodriguez's office, she realized that the confrontation had changed nothing, except making the stakes of her choices crystal clear. The institutional reaction to her pursuit of excellence had confirmed her worst fears about military thinking while simultaneously strengthening her resolve to prove that conventional wisdom about roles and capabilities was more limited than those in authority were willing to acknowledge. The base's routine activities continued around her as Elena walked back to her quarters, but she understood that her situation had fundamentally changed. She was now operating under explicit restrictions that would prevent her from continuing the professional development that had given her life meaning and purpose. The choice between institutional compliance and personal integrity would define not just her remaining time at Forward Operating Base Thunderbolt, but her understanding of what it meant to serve effectively in environments that couldn't recognize unconventional excellence. Elena's evening routine took on new significance. As she contemplated the possibility that her months of preparation might be wasted because institutional thinking couldn't accommodate the reality that exceptional competence might exist outside traditional career paths and organizational structures. Her secret arsenal of knowledge had become a burden rather than an asset, threatening to end her military service without ever providing opportunities to contribute at the level she knew she could achieve. The cruel irony wasn't lost on Elena. As she reviewed the technical manuals and tactical guides that had become central to her identity as someone who understood military operations at levels that approached professional competence, all of that knowledge and capability would remain theoretical unless circumstances arose that forced institutional thinking to confront the reality that talent and dedication could overcome traditional limitations when survival and mission success were at stake. Her personal equipment and specialized knowledge represented months of investment in capabilities that might never be utilized, because the military hierarchy couldn't imagine that civilian contractors might possess skills that could enhance rather than threaten operational effectiveness. Elena faced the prospect of spending her remaining contract period as someone whose potential would be deliberately constrained by institutional limitations rather than evaluated based on actual capability and performance. The psychological challenge of maintaining motivation while operating under explicit restrictions would test Elena's character in ways that her months of preparation hadn't anticipated. She had to decide whether to accept limitations that would preserve her career while wasting her potential, or continue developing capabilities that institutional thinking had declared inappropriate for someone in her position. The stage was set for a test that would determine whether Elena's months of preparation and skill development had been worthwhile investments in capabilities that might prove essential during extraordinary circumstances, or simply academic exercises that couldn't survive contact with institutional reality and command authority that prioritized compliance over competence. Her choice would ultimately be made not through careful calculation, but through instinctive reaction when crisis situations demanded immediate action rather than prolonged deliberation about appropriate roles and professional boundaries. The question was whether such circumstances would arise before institutional pressure forced her to abandon the capabilities she'd worked so hard to develop. As Elena contemplated her situation while surrounded by the equipment and knowledge that represented her hidden potential, she understood that her confrontation with Commander Rodriguez had marked the end of one phase of her military service and the beginning of another. Whether that new phase would provide opportunities to demonstrate her capabilities or simply confirm the institutional wisdom about maintaining traditional role boundaries remained to be determined by circumstances beyond her control. The Whisper campaign had achieved its objective of forcing official recognition of Elena's unconventional approach to professional development. But the resolution of that recognition, through explicit limitations rather than expanded opportunities, reflected institutional thinking that valued compliance over innovation and conformity over excellence when that excellence challenged established assumptions about capability and potential. The administrative aftermath of Elena's meeting with Commander Rodriguez rippled through base operations with bureaucratic efficiency that transformed her status from valued contractor to monitored liability. Within hours of their confrontation, Elena discovered that her access card had been modified to restrict her entry to sensitive areas during specific time periods when classified operations might be discussed or conducted. The changes weren't announced or explained, but their impact was immediately apparent as electronic locks that had previously welcomed her presence now denied access with impersonal beeping sounds that announced her diminished status. Her cleaning assignments underwent systematic revision that reflected careful analysis of potential security risks rather than operational efficiency or her demonstrated competence. Areas that had provided opportunities for technical observation were reassigned to other contractors whose curiosity about military equipment was deemed less problematic. The armory visits that had been central to her informal education were eliminated entirely, replaced with assignments that limited her exposure to weapon systems and tactical equipment that might fuel inappropriate interests. The psychological impact of these changes extended beyond simple inconvenience to fundamental questions about her value and place within the military community she'd worked so hard to serve. Elena found herself relegated to basic custodial duties that utilized only a fraction of her capabilities while preventing her from contributing at levels she knew she could achieve. The irony wasn't lost on her that institutional fear of her competence was reducing overall effectiveness by constraining someone who could have enhanced mission capability through expanded utilization. Her relationship with Sergeant Santos at the firing range became an early casualty of the new restrictions, as administrative guidance discouraged unnecessary interaction between civilian contractors and military personnel who might inadvertently provide access to sensitive information. Santos herself seemed uncomfortable with the changed dynamic, offering apologetic explanations about new policies that prevented the informal mentorship that had been developing between them. The loss of that relationship represented more than professional disappointment. It symbolized a systematic isolation that was being imposed to prevent her from continuing her unconventional development. Master Chief Morrison's attitude toward Elena shifted dramatically as institutional pressure required her to view someone she'd previously respected through the lens of potential security risk rather than exceptional performance. Their interactions became formally polite rather than professionally collaborative, with Morrison carefully avoiding any discussions that might provide Elena with information beyond her immediate custodial needs. The transformation was particularly painful because Elena had genuinely respected Morrison's expertise and leadership, hoping that professional competence might eventually lead to expanded opportunities. The base's communication center became completely off-limits to Elena as security personnel determined that civilian contractors with demonstrated interest in technical subjects posed unacceptable risks during sensitive operations. Her previous access to that facility had provided valuable insights into tactical coordination and emergency procedures, but those learning opportunities were now viewed as inappropriate exposure rather than beneficial cross-training. The restriction reflected institutional inability to distinguish between curiosity that might enhance performance and interest that might compromise security. Elena's living situation deteriorated as other civilian contractors began avoiding association with someone who had attracted unwelcome official attention. The contractor community operated on principles of invisibility and compliance that made Elena's situation a cautionary tale about the dangers of exceeding assigned roles and responsibilities. Her isolation extended beyond professional relationships to encompass her entire social environment, creating psychological pressure that was designed to encourage conformity through loneliness and professional ostracism. The most devastating aspect of her changed status was how it affected her sense of purpose and identity within the military environment that had given her life meaning after her brother's death. Elena had found healing and direction through service that honored Miguel's memory while utilizing her technical capabilities to support combat operations. Now that same service was being constrained by institutional fear that her competence might somehow threaten rather than enhance operational effectiveness. Her personal equipment and study materials took on new significance as Elena realized they represented the only remaining connections to the professional development that had been central to her identity. The technical manuals and ballistics charts hidden in her quarters became symbols of resistance against institutional limitations that she couldn't openly challenge without risking immediate termination. Her evening study sessions continued, but they now carried the weight of forbidden knowledge rather than professional preparation. The psychological challenge of maintaining motivation while operating under explicit surveillance and restriction tested Elena's character in ways that combat stress couldn't have prepared her for. She had to find ways to preserve her sense of self-worth while accepting that her capabilities would be deliberately underutilized by a system that prioritized control over competence. The daily reminder that her potential was being wasted by institutional inflexibility created a different kind of pressure than physical danger or technical challenges. Elena's communication with her family back in El Paso became more difficult, as she struggled to explain her situation without revealing the depth of her frustration with military hierarchy and institutional thinking. Her father's questions about her work, satisfaction, and career prospects forced her to choose between honesty that might worry him and optimism that felt increasingly hollow. Her letters home began to carry undertones of disappointment that she couldn't entirely suppress. Despite her efforts to maintain positive appearances, the base's training facilities remained accessible for basic fitness requirements, but Elena's advanced conditioning routines now attracted suspicious attention from personnel who monitored her activities for signs of continued inappropriate interest in combat capabilities. Her morning runs were noted and timed, her equipment usage was observed and recorded, and her physical performance was evaluated for evidence that she might be preparing for roles beyond her assigned responsibilities. The irony of her situation became more apparent as Elena observed base operations with the analytical skills that institutional restrictions couldn't eliminate. She could see inefficiencies that her technical knowledge could address, anticipate problems that her experience could prevent, and identify opportunities where her capabilities could enhance mission effectiveness. But those insights had to remain private because sharing them would provide evidence of the inappropriate interests that had already created so much institutional concern. Her relationship with the base chaplain, Captain Maria Gonzalez, provided one of the few remaining sources of emotional support as Elena struggled with questions about purpose, service, and the proper response to institutional limitations that seemed to waste rather than utilize available capabilities. Gonzalez couldn't offer solutions to Elena's professional challenges, but she could provide perspective about serving with integrity, even when circumstances prevented full utilization of personal gifts and abilities. The daily routine that had once provided structure and meaning for Elena's service now felt like imprisonment within bureaucratic constraints that prevented her from contributing at the level she knew was possible. Her cleaning duties continued to be performed with professional competence, but the satisfaction that had come from supporting military operations was diminished by the knowledge that her potential contributions were being deliberately limited by institutional fear rather than operational necessity. As Elena faced the prospect of completing her contract under restrictions that would prevent her from utilizing the capabilities she'd worked so hard to develop, she realized that her confrontation with Commander Rodriguez had created a test of character that went beyond simple career considerations. She had to decide whether serving within imposed limitations was better than not serving at all, and whether accepting institutional constraints represented wisdom or surrender to thinking that couldn't accommodate unconventional excellence. Stage was set for circumstances that would force both Elena and the military hierarchy to confront fundamental questions about the relationship between institutional control and operational effectiveness, between traditional role definitions and individual capability, and between the comfort of predictable limitations and the potential benefits of embracing unconventional competence when extraordinary circumstances demanded. Extraordinary responses. The emergency klaxon shattered the pre-dawn silence at forward. Operating base thunderbolt like a sledgehammer through glass, its piercing wail cutting through the Afghan winter air, with an urgency that transformed the sleeping compound into a hive of frantic activity. Elena bolted upright in her narrow contractor bunk, her engineering-trained mind immediately analyzing the alarm pattern that indicated a code-red emergency requiring immediate response from all available personnel. Through the thin walls of the contractor quarters, she could hear boots pounding on concrete as military personnel rushed to their assigned crisis stations with the practiced efficiency that separated elite units from ordinary soldiers. The digital clock beside her bed showed 0347 hours as Elena quickly dressed in her regulation contractor uniform, her movements automatic despite the adrenaline flooding her system. 3 months of operating under institutional restrictions hadn't dulled her instincts for emergency response, and she found herself mentally cataloging potential scenarios that could trigger such a massive base-wide alert. The sustained nature of the alarm suggested something more serious than routine training exercises or minor security incidents that typically warranted only localized responses. Radio chatter exploded across multiple frequencies as Elena grabbed her emergency communication device, the one piece of unauthorized equipment she'd retained, despite explicit orders to limit her technical capabilities. The overlapping voices painted a picture of developing chaos that made her stomach clench with recognition of tactical situations she'd studied during her Forbidden's evening research sessions. Reports of incoming indirect fire mixed with urgent requests for medical personnel and demands for immediate reinforcement suggested the base was facing a coordinated assault rather than isolated harassment. Thunderbolt Base. This is Overwatch 7, crackled through the static with the kind of controlled desperation that indicated combat veterans facing overwhelming odds. We are taking heavy casualties and require immediate sniper support. Primary marksman is down, secondary marksman is combat ineffective, and we cannot maintain defensive positions without precision fire support. The transmission carried background sounds of automatic weapons, fire, and explosions that confirmed Elena's worst fears about the tactical situation developing beyond the base. Perimeter. Elena's contractor training required her to report to the designated civilian shelter during emergency situations, but her engineering instincts and months of tactical study compelled her toward the operations center where she might understand the scope of the crisis and potentially contribute to its resolution. The conflict between official protocol and professional capability created the same internal tension that had characterized her entire service at Forward Operating Base Thunderbolt, forcing her to choose between compliance and competence when lives hung in the balance. The operations center buzzed with controlled chaos as Elena approached the building that housed the base's tactical command and control capabilities. Through reinforced windows, she could see the massive display screens that showed real-time battlefield information, red indicators marking friendly positions under fire, and digital overlays that illustrated the scope of the enemy assault with terrifying clarity. Commander Rodriguez stood at the center of the activity, his face grim as he coordinated defensive responses while trying to piece together intelligence about enemy capabilities and intentions. "Sir, we've got multiple observation posts under simultaneous attack," reported Staff Sergeant Johnson, his voice carrying the strain of managing information overload during crisis conditions. "Enemy forces are using coordinated indirect fire and small unit assaults to suppress our Overwatch capabilities while positioning for what appears to be a major assault on the main base perimeter. They're specifically targeting our sniper positions and communication nodes." Elena pressed closer to the operations center entrance, using her maintenance access card to enter the building despite restrictions that technically prohibited civilian contractors from accessing tactical command areas. During combat operations, Her engineering background and months of studying base security procedures had taught her to navigate emergency protocols that prioritized operational necessity over bureaucratic compliance, and she understood that her technical knowledge might prove valuable during crisis situations that strained normal capabilities. The tactical display showed a nightmare scenario that matched the worst-case studies Elena had analyzed during her secret preparation sessions. Enemy forces had infiltrated multiple positions around the base perimeter, using terrain features and weather conditions to mask their approach until they could launch coordinated attacks on critical defensive positions. The assault demonstrated sophisticated planning and intelligence about base vulnerabilities that suggested months of reconnaissance and preparation by experienced adversaries. "Commander," Rodriguez's voice cut through the operational noise with the authority of someone accustomed to making life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure. "What's our sniper support situation? We need precision fire capability to break up these coordinated attacks before they overwhelm individual positions." His question carried implications that everyone in the operations center understood without requiring explicit explanation about the tactical mathematics that governed defensive operations against superior numbers. "Sir, we have a serious problem," responded Master Chief Morrison, her voice reflecting the professional composure that characterized elite military personnel even during desperate circumstances. "Primary sniper teams at observation posts Alpha and Bravo are combat ineffective due to casualties. Secondary marksmen at Charlie and Delta are suppressed by enemy counter-sniper fire and cannot effectively engage targets without exposing themselves to immediate destruction." Elena found herself analyzing the tactical situation with the same systematic approach she applied to complex engineering problems, identifying variables and constraints that determine possible solutions under current conditions. The base's defensive effectiveness depended on maintaining overwatch capability that could disrupt enemy movement and coordination, but that capability was being systematically eliminated by adversaries who understood the critical importance of neutralizing precision fire support during assault operations. The radio crackled with another urgent transmission from Overwatch 7. The forward observation post that commanded critical fields of fire covering the base's main approach routes. "Thunderbolt Base, Overwatch 7. We are down to 2 effective personnel. No qualified marksmen available, and enemy forces are massing for assault on our position. Without sniper support, we cannot hold this position, and losing it will compromise base security for the main assault." The tactical mathematics were becoming unavoidably clear as Elena listened to reports from multiple observation posts facing similar situations. Enemy forces had successfully neutralized most of the base's precision fire capability through targeted attacks on sniper positions, creating conditions that would allow them to maneuver freely during the main assault phase. The base's defensive plan depended on maintaining overwatch capability that no longer existed due to personnel casualties and equipment damage. "Options," demanded Commander Rodriguez, his voice carrying the weight of command decisions that could determine survival for hundreds of military personnel and civilian contractors. The assembled staff began offering alternatives that reflected conventional military thinking about resource allocation and tactical priorities. But each suggestion carried significant risks and uncertain outcomes that might not address the fundamental problem of inadequate sniper support. Master Chief Morrison voiced the option that everyone understood, but nobody wanted to acknowledge directly. "Sir, we could consolidate remaining effective marksmen at the most critical positions and accept degraded coverage at secondary observation posts. It's not optimal, but it might provide enough precision fire support to disrupt the main assault when it comes." Her suggestion represented military pragmatism that recognized the necessity of choosing which positions to defend when resources were insufficient to maintain comprehensive coverage. Elena found herself studying the tactical display with a growing understanding of a solution that conventional military thinking couldn't accommodate, because it required utilizing capabilities that institutional restrictions had declared inappropriate for civilian contractors. The base possessed precision weapon systems that could provide the required sniper support, but lacked qualified personnel to operate them effectively under combat conditions. Her months of study and preparation had provided theoretical knowledge that could bridge that gap, but sharing such insights would violate every restriction that had been placed on her. Professional development. The sound of incoming mortar rounds exploded across the base perimeter as enemy forces escalated their assault with indirect fire support designed to suppress defensive positions and create chaos that would facilitate the main ground attack. Elena felt the building shake as explosions walked closer to critical infrastructure, confirming that adversaries possessed accurate intelligence about base layout and defensive capabilities. The systematic nature of the attack suggested professional military training rather than improvised insurgent tactics. Thunderbolt Base, this is Overwatch 3, transmitted another desperate voice through the radio static and background explosions. We have visual contact with enemy sniper teams establishing positions at grid coordinates that will allow them to engage the main gate and administrative areas. We need counter-sniper fire immediately, or they'll be able to pick off personnel moving between buildings during the main assault. Commander Rodriguez studied the tactical display with the expression of someone calculating impossible odds and finding no acceptable solutions within conventional parameters. The mathematical reality was that the base lacked sufficient qualified marksmen to maintain defensive overwatch while enemy forces systematically eliminated existing sniper capabilities. Traditional military doctrine offered no solutions for situations where personnel casualties exceeded replacement capabilities. During active combat operations, Elena realized that her months of preparation and skill development had led to this moment when theoretical knowledge would either prove valuable or remain forever academic. The Barrett .50 caliber rifles, positioned at various observation posts, represented the technical capability required to address the tactical crisis, but institutional thinking couldn't accommodate the possibility that a civilian contractor might possess the skills necessary to operate such systems effectively under combat conditions. The base's ammunition storage facility, which Elena knew intimately through her maintenance duties, contained specialized rounds that could penetrate enemy cover and disable equipment at ranges that conventional weapons couldn't achieve. Her engineering background had taught her to understand the ballistic properties of different ammunition types, knowledge that could inform tactical decisions about target engagement and resource allocation during extended combat operations. "Sir," Elena said quietly, her voice barely audible above the tactical discussions and radio communications that filled the operations center. Commander Rodriguez didn't hear her initial attempt, focused as he was on coordinating defensive responses that might prevent base overrun but couldn't address the fundamental problem of inadequate sniper support. Elena cleared her throat and tried again, louder this time, knowing that her next words would either validate months of preparation or confirm institutional wisdom about maintaining traditional role boundaries during crisis situations. "Commander Rodriguez, sir." Her voice carried across the operations center with clarity that cut through background noise and urgent conversations, drawing attention from personnel who couldn't imagine what a civilian contractor might contribute to tactical planning during combat operations. The operations center fell silent as Rodriguez turned toward her, his expression shifting from intense concentration to irritation at civilian interference during critical military decision-making. "Vasquez, this is not the time for contractor concerns. Report to the civilian shelter and await further instructions." His dismissal was automatic, reflecting months of institutional conditioning that viewed civilian contractors as liabilities to be protected rather than resources that might contribute to mission success. "Sir, I'm not asking about shelter procedures," Elena replied, her voice steady despite adrenaline that threatened to overwhelm her careful preparation for exactly this type of scenario. "I'm volunteering to provide sniper support for the observation posts." Her words hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon, creating silence that seemed to stretch for eternity while everyone processed the implications of what she'd just proposed. The tactical display continued, showing red indicators that marked friendly positions under fire, enemy movement toward assault positions, and the systematic elimination of defensive capabilities that would determine whether forward operating base Thunderbolt could survive the coordinated attack. The mathematical reality remained unchanged by traditional military thinking. The base needed precision fire support that conventional personnel allocation couldn't provide. Commander Rodriguez's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and what might have been anger at civilian presumption during the military crisis. "Vasquez, you're a janitor," he said with the kind of patient explanation reserved for someone who had fundamentally misunderstood their role and capabilities. "You're not qualified for combat operations, and you're certainly not trained on precision weapon systems. Your job is to clean facilities, not to engage enemy forces." Elena maintained her position at attention, understanding that conventional military wisdom argued against everything she was proposing, but knowing that unconventional problems sometimes required unconventional solutions. "Sir, I am qualified," she replied, her voice carrying confidence built through months of study and preparation that nobody knew existed. "I understand the weapon systems, I know the engagement ranges, and I can make the shots you need to maintain defensive overwatch." The operations center remained frozen in tableau as military personnel struggled to process the concept of civilian contractor competence in areas that institutional thinking had declared impossible. Outside, the sounds of combat continued escalating as enemy forces moved closer to positions that would allow them to launch the main assault that could overwhelm defensive capabilities already degraded by systematic elimination of sniper support. "Master." Chief Morrison stepped forward, her expression mixing protective concern with professional skepticism about capabilities that seemed to exceed everything they understood about civilian contractor training and qualifications. "Elena, combat marksmanship isn't about understanding weapon specifications. It's about making precision shots when people are shooting back at you, when lives depend on accuracy, and when missing means watching friends die." Elena's response drew upon months of mental preparation for exactly this type of challenge to her credibility and capability. "Chief, I understand that combat conditions create pressures that training exercises can't replicate. But the alternative is accepting degraded defensive capability when the base needs every available resource to survive this assault." Her words carried the weight of someone who had studied the tactical situation and understood the mathematical reality that conventional thinking couldn't address through traditional resource allocation. The tactical display showed enemy forces moving into final assault positions while friendly observation posts continued reporting casualties and equipment damage that reduced defensive effectiveness with each passing minute. The crisis was accelerating toward a conclusion that would either validate Elena's unconventional preparation or confirm institutional wisdom about maintaining role boundaries when survival was at stake. Commander Rodriguez faced a decision that would define not only the immediate tactical situation, but fundamental questions about capability recognition, institutional flexibility, and the price of conventional thinking when extraordinary circumstances demanded extraordinary responses. The Barrett rifles waited in their prepared positions, technical capability without qualified operators, while Elena stood ready to bridge that gap through knowledge and skills that the military hierarchy had declared inappropriate for someone in her position. Commander Rodriguez's response echoed through the operations center with the finality of military authority backed by years of command experience and institutional wisdom about civilian contractor limitations. "Absolutely not, Vasquez. You're maintenance personnel, not a combat operator. I need qualified marksmen handling precision weapons, not well-intentioned contractors attempting missions they're not trained for. His dismissal carried the weight of protocol and common sense, supported by everyone in the room who understood that desperate circumstances didn't automatically transform janitors into snipers. Alina felt the familiar sting of institutional dismissal, but this time the stakes extended far beyond her personal frustration with limited recognition. The tactical display showed friendly positions deteriorating under coordinated enemy assault, while conventional solutions remained tragically inadequate for the crisis that was unfolding with mathematical precision. "Sir, with respect, what qualified?" "Marksman," she replied, her voice carrying urgency that matched the deteriorating situation. "Your primary snipers are casualties, your secondary marksmen are suppressed, and backup support is 40 minutes away. The enemy will overrun defensive positions before conventional reinforcement arrives." The brutal mathematics of the situation couldn't be argued away through appeals to protocol or training requirements. Enemy forces had systematically eliminated the base's precision fire capability through targeted attacks that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of defensive vulnerabilities. The Barrett rifles remained positioned at observation posts, technical capability without operators, while friendly forces faced assault without the overwatch support that defensive planning had assumed would be available. Staff Sergeant Johnson stepped forward with the kind of protective authority that had characterized military personnel interactions with Alina throughout her service at Forward Operating Base Thunderbolt. "Alina, understanding weapon specifications isn't the same as combat marksmanship. Engaging enemy forces requires training and experience that classroom study can't provide. The stress, the pressure, the consequences of missing, those aren't things you learn from technical manuals." Alina's months of mental preparation crystallized into this moment when theoretical knowledge would either prove sufficient or confirm institutional wisdom about the limitations of self-directed education. "Sergeant Johnson, I understand that. Combat conditions create challenges that peaceful training can't replicate. But the alternative is accepting mission failure when the base possesses the technical capability to maintain defensive effectiveness." Her response drew upon engineering training that emphasized practical solutions over theoretical perfection. When system failure threatened catastrophic consequences, the radio crackled with another desperate transmission from Overwatch 7. Background sounds of intensifying combat, confirming that the tactical situation was accelerating beyond the point where conventional solutions could address developing crisis conditions. "Thunderbolt Base. Enemy forces are advancing on our position. We can see muzzle flashes from sniper positions that will dominate the main approach routes. Without counter-sniper fire, we cannot prevent enemy observation and engagement of base personnel during movement between defensive positions." Master Chief Morrison approached Alina with the expression of someone wrestling between protective instincts and recognition of tactical necessity. "Alina, even if you could handle the technical aspects of precision shooting, combat marksmanship requires integration with tactical communications, coordination with other defensive elements, and decision-making under pressure that goes beyond individual competence. You'd be operating in an environment where mistakes cost lives." Elena recognized Morrison's concerns as legitimate professional considerations rather than simple dismissal of civilian contractor capabilities. "Chief, I've studied tactical communication protocols, memorized radio frequencies and call signs, and understand defensive coordination requirements. My engineering background taught me systematic decision-making under pressure, and my personal motivation comes from understanding that mission success depends on utilizing every available capability when conventional resources prove insufficient." The operations center buzzed with urgent activity as personnel coordinated responses to multiple crisis points while struggling with resource limitations that conventional military doctrine couldn't address. The enemy assault was proceeding according to textbook principles that assumed friendly forces would maintain normal defensive capabilities. But those assumptions were being invalidated by systematic elimination of sniper support that left gaps in coverage that ground forces couldn't fill. Commander Rodriguez found himself caught between command, responsibility for personnel safety, and tactical necessity that demanded unconventional solutions to extraordinary circumstances. His training argued against departing from established protocols that protected civilian contractors from combat exposure, but his tactical experience recognized that conventional thinking might prove inadequate when survival depended on utilizing every available resource regardless of traditional role limitations. "Vasquez," Rodriguez said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of decisions that would either vindicate or destroy careers, depending on their outcomes. "You're asking me to authorize civilian contractor participation in direct combat operations. That violates every protocol of contractor utilization and exposes you to risks that your contract doesn't contemplate. If you're wrong about your capabilities, people die. If you're right but get killed, I have to explain to your family why. I sent a janitor to do a sniper's job." Elena understood the full implications of what she was proposing, recognition that went beyond simple career considerations to fundamental questions about identity, capability, and the price of proving that institutional limitations might be less absolute than those in authority believed. "Sir, I understand the risks and I accept them. My brother Miguel died serving his country as a Marine Corps sniper. I can't bring him back, but I can honor his memory by using everything he taught. And maybe it'll help prevent other families from receiving the kind of notification that destroyed mine." The personal revelation shifted the dynamic in the operations center as military personnel recognized that Elena's motivation transcended professional ambition or civilian curiosity about military operations. Her connection to the sniper community through family tragedy provided context that made her technical knowledge less surprising while highlighting the personal stakes that drove her: unconventional preparation and willingness to risk everything for mission success. "Elena," Master Chief Morrison said quietly, "if Miguel was your brother, then you understand better than most what combat marksmanship costs and what it requires. But understanding the price doesn't automatically mean you can pay it when lives depend on precision that allows no margin for error." Her words carried respect for Elena's loss while maintaining professional skepticism about capabilities that seemed to exceed civilian contractor training. Another explosion rocked the base as enemy indirect fire walked closer to critical infrastructure, confirming that the assault was entering final phases that would determine whether forward operating base Thunderbolt could maintain defensive integrity against coordinated attack. The tactical display showed enemy forces moving into positions that would allow direct assault on observation posts that lacked effective sniper support to disrupt approaching infantry. Elena made her final appeal with words that drew upon months of preparation and years of grief that had shaped her understanding of service and sacrifice. "Commander Rodriguez, the Barrett rifles are positioned and zeroed. The tactical situation provides clear fields of fire at ranges I've studied extensively. The enemy forces are moving through predictable approach routes that offer limited concealment from prepared positions. I can make the shots you need to maintain defensive overwatch, or you can watch those positions fall because conventional thinking can't accommodate the possibility that capability might exist outside traditional career paths." Rodriguez studied the tactical display with the intensity of someone calculating odds that offered no good options through conventional resource allocation. The enemy assault was proceeding with professional competence that suggested military training and coordination, but their success depended on maintaining suppression of defensive sniper capability that no longer existed through normal personnel assignments. Elena represented the only potential solution to a tactical problem that Conventional wisdom insisted couldn't be solved by civilian contractor intervention. "Johnson, Morrison," Rodriguez commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone making decisions that transcended normal protocols. "Escort contractor Vasquez to observation post Alpha. She's going to prove whether months of studying technical manuals can substitute for formal sniper training when lives depend on precision marksmanship." His decision violated every conventional principle about civilian contractor utilization, but tactical necessity demanded solutions that institutional thinking had declared impossible. Elena felt adrenaline flooding her system as months of theoretical preparation suddenly became an immediate reality, requiring performance under conditions that would either validate her unconventional education or confirm institutional wisdom about the limitations of self-directed skill development. "Sir, I won't disappoint you or the personnel depending on precision fire support." Her response carried confidence built through systematic study, but tempered by recognition that combat conditions would test capabilities in ways that peaceful preparation couldn't replicate. The movement to observation post Alpha required tactical coordination that Elena had studied during her secret preparation sessions, but never practiced under combat conditions. Staff Sergeant Johnson provided protection and guidance while Master Chief Morrison monitored radio communications that coordinated their approach with defensive elements already engaged with enemy forces. The experience of moving through combat zones as a participant rather than observer represented a fundamental transformation in Elena's relationship with military operations. Observation post Alpha commanded excellent fields of fire over terrain that enemy forces would have to traverse during their final assault approach, but the position had been abandoned after sniper casualties left it without qualified operators. The Barrett .50 caliber rifle remained in its prepared position, technical capability waiting for someone with the knowledge and determination to utilize it effectively. Elena approached the weapon with movements that demonstrated familiarity rather than uncertainty, hands moving across the system with confidence that surprised her military escorts. "Elena," Johnson said, his voice carrying professional respect, mixed with concern about civilian contractor exposure to combat stress. "If you're going to do this, you need to understand that missing isn't an option. Enemy forces are coordinating their approach to overwhelm defensive positions, and precision fire is the only thing that can disrupt their timing and coordination. Every shot has to count because we don't have ammunition to waste on learning opportunities." Elena settled into the shooting position with movements that reflected months of visualization exercises and technical study. Her engineering background providing systematic approach to equipment operation under pressure. Barrett's scope revealed enemy positions exactly as tactical analysis had predicted, with opposing forces utilizing terrain features and movement patterns that matched scenarios she'd studied during her Forbidden Evening research sessions. "Johnson, Morrison, I have visual contact with enemy sniper teams at coordinates that match intelligence reports. Range approximately 1,200 meters, multiple personnel in prepared positions." The first shot would determine whether Elena's months of preparation had provided sufficient foundation for effective performance under combat conditions, or whether institutional wisdom about the limitations of civilian contractor capabilities would be confirmed through tragic failure. Her breathing slowed to rhythms she'd practiced during secret training sessions, mathematical calculations crystallizing into practical application that would either save lives or cost them, depending on the accuracy of knowledge acquired through determination rather than formal instruction. Master Chief Morrison provided spotting support with professional competence that reflected her recognition of Elena's commitment, regardless of questions about civilian contractor qualification for combat operations. "Elena, wind is minimal, visibility is excellent, target is stationary. This is your shot to prove that capability matters more than credentials when mission success depends on utilizing every available resource." Elena's shot broke like thunder across the Afghan landscape, the Barrett's distinctive signature announcing that observation post-alpha had regained precision, fire capability through unconventional means that institutional thinking had declared impossible. Through the scope, she watched the enemy sniper drop immediately, eliminating a threat that could have compromised base security during the main assault phase. But there was no time for celebration as radio communications indicated multiple additional targets requiring immediate engagement. Confirmed hit, Morrison reported with professional satisfaction that reflected her appreciation for effective marksmanship regardless of its source. Enemy sniper eliminated. Threat to main approach route neutralized. Johnson, coordinate with base operations to identify additional priority targets for engagement. The transformation from protective skepticism to tactical collaboration reflected Morrison's recognition that Elena's performance was exceeding expectations, while providing capabilities that conventional resource allocation couldn't deliver. Elena's second shot engaged a machine gun position that was providing suppressing fire against friendly forces attempting to maintain defensive coordination. The range required precise calculation of ballistic trajectory and environmental factors, technical knowledge that her months of study had provided, but combat conditions were testing under pressure that academic preparation couldn't replicate. Her engineering background provided confidence in mathematical analysis, while her brother's memory provided motivation that transcended personal limitations. The tactical situation began shifting as Elena's precision fire disrupted enemy coordination and eliminated key personnel who had been directing the coordinated assault. Radio communications from other observation posts reported that enemy forces were responding to unexpected sniper capability by altering their approach patterns and seeking cover that reduced their effectiveness while exposing them to engagement from defensive positions they had previously suppressed. Thunderbolt Base, this is Overwatch 7, transmitted the grateful voice of personnel who had been facing overwhelming odds without adequate support. Unknown sniper support is neutralizing enemy positions and allowing us to maintain defensive integrity. Whoever's providing precision fire from alpha position is saving this entire sector. The recognition carried weight beyond simple tactical appreciation, acknowledging that unconventional solutions had proved effective when conventional approaches failed. Elena continued engaging targets with precision that reflected months of study and determination to prove that capability could overcome institutional limitations when extraordinary circumstances demanded extraordinary performance. Each shot represented vindication of her conviction that talent and dedication could transcend traditional career boundaries when mission success depended on utilizing every available resource regardless of organizational hierarchy or role restrictions. Commander Rodriguez's voice crackled through radio, communications with acknowledgement that transcended his initial skepticism about civilian contractor capabilities. Contractor Vasquez, your marksmanship is maintaining defensive positions that conventional wisdom said couldn't be held. Continue precision fire support and coordinate with tactical operations for target prioritization. His words carried professional respect that Elena had sought throughout her service, but had never received until crisis circumstances forced recognition of capabilities that institutional thinking couldn't accommodate. As the enemy assault faltered under precision fire that they hadn't anticipated and couldn't counter through conventional means, Elena realized that her months of preparation had achieved their ultimate validation through performance that exceeded everyone's expectations, including her own. The Barrett rifle had become an extension of her capabilities rather than just a technical system, each shot representing the culmination of determination, study, and commitment to service that honored her brother's memory while proving that excellence could emerge from unexpected sources when circumstances demanded optimal performance. The aftermath would bring questions about institutional flexibility, role definitions, and the recognition of unconventional competence within military organizations that valued protocol and predictability. But in this moment, surrounded by the evidence of successful defense against overwhelming odds, Elena Vasquez had transformed from invisible janitor to essential operator through knowledge, determination, and willingness to risk everything for mission success when lives depended on capabilities that existed outside traditional boundaries of possibility. The tactical situation continued evolving as Elena's precision fire support enabled a coordinated counterattack that transformed defensive operations into offensive initiative. Enemy forces, having lost their coordination and key personnel to unexpected sniper capability, began withdrawing from positions they had spent weeks preparing for assault. Radio communications from multiple observation posts reported enemy movement away from the base perimeter, confirming that the immediate threat was diminishing under pressure that conventional defensive planning hadn't anticipated. Staff Sergeant Johnson monitored Elena's continued engagement of retreating enemy forces with professional appreciation that reflected his growing recognition of capabilities that exceeded every assumption about civilian contractor training. Elena, your shooting is textbook perfect. Range estimation, wind compensation, target leading. You're performing like someone with years of formal sniper training rather than someone who learned from technical manuals and determination. His words carried weight beyond simple compliment, acknowledging technical competence that challenged institutional assumptions about how advanced military skills were acquired and maintained. Master Chief Morrison coordinated target information with other defensive positions while observing Elena's systematic approach to precision marksmanship under combat stress. Johnson, she's not just making lucky shots. Her target prioritization shows tactical understanding of how to disrupt enemy coordination and command structure. She's engaging personnel and equipment that will have maximum impact on enemy capability rather than just shooting at whatever's visible. Morrison's analysis reflected her recognition that Elena's performance demonstrated strategic thinking that complemented technical marksmanship skills. The base's medical personnel reported minimal friendly casualties due to the effective sniper support that had prevented enemy forces from achieving surprise and coordination necessary for successful assault operations. Elena's intervention had not only maintained defensive positions, but had actually saved lives by disrupting enemy plans before they could inflict the casualties that coordinated assault typically produced. The mathematical reality was that unconventional solutions had achieved results that conventional resource allocation couldn't have delivered under the circumstances. Commander Rodriguez's voice returned to radio communications with acknowledgement that transcended his initial resistance to civilian contractor participation in combat operations. Contractor Vasquez, preliminary assessment indicates that your precision fire support was decisive in preventing base overrun and maintaining defensive integrity. Your marksmanship eliminated key enemy personnel and equipment that enabled successful defense against overwhelming odds. His words carried official recognition that Elena had sought throughout her service but had never received until extraordinary circumstances forced acknowledgement of extraordinary performance. As dawn broke over forward operating base Thunderbolt, the full scope of the night's crisis became apparent through damage assessment and intelligence analysis that revealed the sophistication of the enemy assault that had been defeated through a combination of conventional defense and unconventional sniper support. Enemy forces had positioned themselves for coordinated attack that would have overwhelmed defensive positions if precision fire capability hadn't been maintained through Elena's unauthorized but essential intervention. The base's intelligence section began analyzing captured equipment and intercepted communications that confirmed the enemy assault had been planned and rehearsed with understanding of defensive capabilities that should have made it successful. The failure of that assault was attributed directly to unexpected sniper capability that disrupted timing and coordination while eliminating key personnel who had been directing tactical operations. Elena's performance had not just met requirements, but had exceeded them in ways that changed tactical outcomes. Elena's return to the operations center marked a transformation in how military personnel perceive civilian contractor capabilities and potential contributions to mission success. The same individuals who had questioned her inappropriate interests in tactical subjects now recognized that those interests had translated into capabilities that proved essential during crisis conditions. Her knowledge of weapon systems, tactical procedures, and operational planning had enabled performance that validated years of self-directed preparation. The base chaplain, Captain Maria Gonzalez, approached Elena with emotional recognition of someone who had found purpose through service that honored family tradition while transcending traditional role limitations. Elena, your brother Miguel would be proud of how you served today. You honored his memory by using everything he taught you to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Her words provided emotional validation that complemented professional recognition from military personnel who had witnessed Elena's transformation from overlooked contractor to essential operator, master. Chief Morrison's attitude toward Elena underwent complete transformation as she recognized that institutional assumptions about civilian contractor limitations had prevented recognition of capabilities that could enhance rather than threaten operational effectiveness. Elena, I owe you an apology. I let institutional thinking blind me to individual capability and potential contribution. Your performance today proved that competence matters more than credentials when mission success depends on utilizing every available resource. Staff Sergeant Johnson approached Elena with professional respect that reflected his recognition of marksmanship, skills that equaled or exceeded those of formerly trained military snipers. Elena, I've worked with designated marksmen throughout my career, and your shooting under combat pressure demonstrated technical competence and tactical understanding that most people never achieve regardless of their training background. You proved that dedication and systematic study can produce capabilities that rival formal military education. The base's armory became a different environment for Elena as Sergeant First Class. Williams recognized that her technical knowledge of weapon systems had been validated through combat performance that demonstrated practical application of theoretical understanding. Elena, you know more about these weapon systems than most people who are officially qualified to operate them. Your maintenance work always showed unusual attention to detail, but now I understand that attention came from genuine understanding rather than just thoroughness. Elena's personal equipment and study materials took on new significance as military personnel recognized that her unauthorized preparation had provided capabilities that proved essential during crisis conditions. The technical manuals and ballistics charts that had once been viewed as evidence of inappropriate interests were now recognized as tools that had enabled mission-critical performance when conventional resources proved insufficient. Commander Rodriguez formally addressed Elena's status during an impromptu ceremony that recognized her contribution to base defense while acknowledging the institutional challenges created by civilian contractor performance that exceeded traditional role boundaries. Contractor Vasquez, your actions during last night's assault demonstrated capabilities that our institutional thinking said couldn't exist outside formal military training. You proved that dedication, systematic study, and personal commitment can produce competence that equals or exceeds what traditional career paths typically deliver. The recognition ceremony included a presentation of commendation that acknowledged Elena's marksmanship and tactical contribution to mission success, while carefully avoiding official designation that might conflict with civilian contractor status. Rodriguez's words carried institutional acknowledgement that Elena's performance had forced reconsideration of assumptions about capability development and recognition within military organizations that valued protocol but needed to adapt when exceptional circumstances revealed exceptional competence. Elena's family back in El Paso received notification of her combat performance through carefully worded communication that honored her contribution while respecting security requirements. About operational details. Her father, Sergeant Major Carlos Vasquez, understood the significance of his daughter's recognition in ways that transcended simple professional achievement, recognizing that she had found purpose and direction through service that honored Miguel's memory while establishing her own legacy of excellence under pressure. The base's contractor community underwent its own transformation as Elena's performance challenged assumptions about civilian contractor capabilities and potential contributions to military operations. Other contractors began questioning whether their own backgrounds might include knowledge and skills that could enhance their service if institutional thinking allowed recognition and utilization of unconventional competence when circumstances demanded optimal performance from every available resource. Elena's quarters were returned to their original configuration as restrictions on her movement and access were quietly lifted in recognition that her demonstrated capabilities warranted trust rather than limitation. The technical manuals and study materials that had once been viewed as evidence of inappropriate ambition were now recognized as tools that had enabled essential contribution to mission success when conventional approaches proved inadequate. Shooting range became a different environment as Sergeant Santos recognized that Elena's precision and dedication had been preparation for exactly the kind of performance she had delivered under combat conditions. "Elena, I always knew you were serious about marksmanship, but I never imagined that your preparation was this systematic and comprehensive. You turned theoretical knowledge into practical capability that saved lives when it mattered most." Forward. Operating Base Thunderbolt's operational procedures underwent review as leadership recognized that institutional assumptions about civilian contractor limitations might prevent recognition of capabilities that could enhance mission effectiveness. Elena's performance had demonstrated that exceptional competence could emerge from unexpected sources when individuals were willing to pursue excellence beyond their assigned roles, and institutional thinking was flexible enough to recognize and utilize such capabilities. Elena's morning routine resumed with fundamental changes in how she was perceived and utilized by military personnel who had witnessed her transformation from invisible support staff to essential operator through performance that validated months of systematic preparation. Her cleaning duties continued, but they were now understood as one aspect of comprehensive service that included capabilities extending far beyond custodial responsibilities. When circumstances demanded optimal utilization of all available resources, legacy of Elena's performance extended beyond immediate tactical success to fundamental questions about talent recognition, institutional flexibility, and the importance of evaluating individuals based on demonstrated capability rather than traditional career progression and formal qualification. Her story became part of base folklore that celebrated unconventional excellence while challenging assumptions about the relationship between assigned roles and individual potential. As Elena reflected on her transformation from dismissed contractor to recognized operator, she understood that her months of preparation had achieved validation through performance that honored her brother's memory, while proving that dedication and systematic study could overcome institutional limitations when extraordinary circumstances demanded extraordinary responses. The Barrett rifle, that had become an extension of her capabilities, represented more than just successful marksmanship. It symbolized the power of individual determination to transcend traditional boundaries when mission success depended on utilizing every available resource, regardless of organizational hierarchy or conventional wisdom about capability and potential. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.